Hello, my friends, and welcome to Spaniard School of Student Podcast. I'm your host, Charlie the Spaniard Brenneman, and this is episode number 49, Is Happiness a Choice? And before I get into the content of today's episode, I want to give you a little bit of background information on me and the show, in case you're a first-time listener. I'm a former junior and senior high Spanish teacher and UFC fighter. And since my last fight back at the end of 2014, I started writing books, hosting a podcast, and speaking on stages. And I share my personal story coming from a small town, wrestling my whole life, winning and losing, dealing with heartbreaks and setbacks, and pursuing my goals and dreams, to then reaching the UFC and fighting professionally. Post all of that, creating a podcast and writing books and speaking. And I used my story to help teach you, in this case, middle and high school students, lessons that I learned from fighting that you can apply to life. I also love reading books. I read a ton of books. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see them behind me. I love learning. It adds to my life reading books in a million different ways. And so I put this show together to help you navigate or get through the ups and downs in your life. And the topics on the show are based on the feedback that you give me. So I speak in schools a lot, and I get a lot of messages, especially on Instagram. And they tell me what's going on in your life and what you'd like help with and the different challenges that you're going through. And so today's topic is happiness a choice? And it was inspired by a recent book I read called The Happiest Man on Earth by Eddie Jaku. And it's a fascinating book. It's called the subtitle is The Beautiful Life of an Auschwitz Survivor. So Eddie Jaku survived the Holocaust. And in this book, he tells his personal story. And I love reading books like this, even though it's really difficult at times to read the details of some of the atrocities and the evil that he and the other people in the concentration camps went through. It adds kind of perspective or hope, or makes me reflect on my own life and how I can be a better person. And in this case, how I can find happiness, because this book, The Happiest Man on Earth, written by Eddie Jaku, is about how he found happiness after surviving the Holocaust, after surviving evil, after living through torture and terrible conditions for years and years, and being threatened and degraded and treated horribly. He tells one story in this book. It's a deep topic. It's, for middle and high schoolers, but I think he can handle it. He tells in this story, in his book, he tells the story of a little Jewish kid, saying that when he grows up, he wants to be a dog because the Nazis treated dogs better than they treated Jewish people. So it's horrible, horrible stuff. So from this book, I was inspired to create this episode asking you this question: is happiness a choice? And the idea of this episode is not to give a definitive answer. I don't know the definite answer to this question. I'm going to share my thoughts and my philosophy when it comes to this. But the whole point in this is for you to use this episode, use my thoughts and insights to help create your own thoughts and ask yourself, hey, is happiness a choice? And am I choosing happiness? So I think happiness is a choice. And I say that with a little asterisk next to it, or with some nuance, meaning it's not cut and dry. It's not a black and white answer. It's not, yes, I'm happy. I decide to be happy and then I'm happy. That's not the way it works. I do think happiness is a choice, but I think there's different levels of happiness. I think there's different life situations for every person watching this video or listening to this audio via your podcast app. I think it's different for all of us. But ultimately, thinking on my own experiences, reflecting on this book, The Happiest Man on Earth, if I had to give a definite answer, I would say, yes, it is a choice, although it's very different. And our actions, what we do on a daily basis, can lead to our happiness. I read a book a long time ago, and the idea was that sometimes our emotions, feeling happy, sad, frustrated, angry, etc., lead our actions. Right? Sometimes if you're sad, you just want to lay around all day. But then sometimes our actions have to lead our emotions. Meaning if you're feeling down and sad, rather than letting those emotions have you sit on the couch and do nothing and feel bad for yourself, you would do an action that would make you feel better. Exercising, interacting with other people, reading a book, watching an inspirational movie or documentary. Sometimes in life, your emotions will lead to your actions, but sometimes your actions will have to lead to your emotions. So if you're not feeling happy right now, you might have to do things, actual actions that will increase your happiness. So that's what I said. Yes, I think it is a choice, but also there's some nuance or details around that simple answer. And so I want to provide you with two specific examples of why I think happiness is a choice. And again, remember, the idea of this episode is for you to think about it in your own mind and for you to come up with your own answer. Why I think happiness is a choice. When I was a kid, I learned, my dad told me, control the controllables. So I wrestled and I would worry about everything, like how big the other guy's muscles were, how cool his shoes were, or how awesome his singlet was, or who his coach was. I'd worry about all these details that I had no control over. And my dad would say, control the controllables. Control the controllables. What things can you control? And then control them. Later on in life, I read a book and it mentioned 3 controllables. And it used the word APE, A-P-E, your attitude, your preparation, and your effort. Your attitude, your preparation, and your effort. And when I think of these 3 controllables, my attitude, my preparation, and my effort, if I control all of those things and I maintain a positive attitude, or I look for the good in a situation, if I prepare to the best of my ability, I mean preparing my mind and my body for life, eating well, exercising, etc., reading books. I mean preparing for a test. I mean preparing for a difficult race that I do. Preparation in any aspect. If I control my attitude and I look for the good in situation, if I control my preparation, I do the best of my ability to prepare. And then my effort, if I give everything of myself in anything that I do, as a dad, as a husband, as a speaker, as a podcaster, as a wrestler, as a fighter, if I give my effort, that makes me feel good. So those 3 things, attitude, preparation, and effort, those are controllables, meaning I can control those things. And I know from experience, not just from the books, but from experience, that if I control those things and I look in the mirror, I feel happy. So that is one reason for my thought or my reasoning as to why happiness is a choice, because those 3 things are controllable. And if I control them, I know that they make me feel happy. Therefore, I can choose to do those things, and happiness to me is a choice in this example. The next thing is this thing called the progress principle. So I read a book a long time ago that's called The Happiness Hypothesis. And it's a book about happiness and like what leads to happiness. And one of the things in the book, it said that goals or outcomes, right? State championship medal, $1 million in your bank account, 100% on your test, a fancy new car, making $100,000 a year. That the goal, the outcome, the thing that you're reaching for is not the thing that gives you happiness. Rather, it's the progress toward those things that gives you happiness, the progress principle, that as you progress towards something, that's where the happiness is. It's not at the end of the rainbow. It's not a certain dollar amount or a certain car or a certain number of followers or a certain number of likes on Instagram. It's not that. It's rather progressing towards something. That's where happiness is. This podcast, what you're listening to or watching right now, I work for it. I had to read this book. I had to take notes in my notebook. I have to work toward it, and that gives me a good feeling. So I know that part of my happiness is working toward something. And for you specifically, it could be working toward better grades, working toward playing an instrument better, working toward being a better artist, working toward developing confidence. It could be working toward making an impact in your community. Any or all of those things, as you progress in them, will give you a feeling of happiness. So that's the second reason that I think happiness is a choice, although it's not an easy, cut and dry, black and white choice. So Eddie Jaku, again, if you're watching, you can see the book right here, The Happiest Man on Earth. He is proof positive that you can be happy. In this book, he outlines lessons that he learned through his life prior to the Holocaust, during the Holocaust, and post his time in concentration camps. He lived to be over 100 years old. And so whenever I'm feeling down about myself or about my life, having read this book, I think of Eddie, and I say to myself, if he can find happiness, I can find happiness. And some of those keys, really briefly and quickly, that he mentions being so important to finding happiness is forgiveness or letting go of anger and hate and grudges. Morality, being a good person. Education, working hard, developing skills, continuously learning. Kindness and communication. He mentions how important friendship was while in the concentration camps. And then gratitude, being grateful or thankful for what you have in life. Again, those are just some of the many examples he gives in the book. So to summarize, my answer to the question, is happiness a choice? I believe it is a choice. But I also want to say that it's not always an easy choice, that it takes work. So I hope you all enjoyed this. Again, whether you're watching on YouTube or whether you're listening via the Spaniard School podcast, I encourage you all to subscribe to both my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Charlie Spaniard, and or Spaniard School, the podcast, on any podcast app you're using, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you're getting your podcast. You can listen to it there. Well, thank you for tuning in. My website is charliespaniard.com. All the links are below, whether you're listening on your podcast or whether you're watching on YouTube. All that information is below in the links. I encourage you to visit my site, connect on social media at Charlie Spaniard, and I look forward to seeing you next week. Thanks for tuning in.